Mr. Speaker, today I stand before you and our colleagues on a matter of collective privilege to bring forth to our attention and the public the predicament of our overseas Filipino workers stranded in congested temporary shelters or bahay kalinga run by our government in Kuwait. This situation was recently highlighted by the plight of our OFWs in the bahay kalinga in Kuwait, wherein hundreds of them were cramped in the shelter while waiting for their repatriation, thus leading to illnesses as exacerbated by the flu season in Kuwait. On January 20, 2023, the Department of Migrant Workers, led by Secretary Tuts Ople, and the Overseas Workers Welfare Administration, or OWA, the attached agency of DMW, led by Administrator Arnel Ignacio, reported that there were 421 OFWs, both documented and undocumented, that have been in refuge in Bahay Kalinga in Kuwait. The shelter has been congested since it can only accommodate only 250 to 300 the most. Most of those in the shelter were victims of various forms of abuse by employers, and many of them were getting sick or suffering from depression. Mr. Speaker, the situation prompted the DMW to send a team to Kuwait, led by Yusek Hans Kakdak, to check on the living conditions of the OFWs in the shelter, which they found indeed unhealthy and uncomfortable. In response, nearly 200 OFWs from the congested shelter have already been repatriated from Kuwait so far. Maraming salamat po. Ang ating OFW Partylist ay nakipagtulungan sa pakikipag-connect po sa DMW, sa OWA, sa DFA, para po sa ilampung repatriation ng ating mga kababayan sa Kuwait. Although this particular situation in Kuwait was immediately addressed by DMW, this is just symptomatic of a deeper and more crucial issues. The real and persistent problems here are the intertwined challenges. 1. Maltreatment of our OFWs by their employers, forcing them to run away. 2. The status of our shelters run by our government through our polos, now known as migrant workers' offices. 3. Our government's repatriation funding and system for distressed OFWs. Mr. Speaker, the Philippine Overseas Labor Offices, or polos, reported that in 2020, nearly 5,000 cases of maltreatment of OFWs were recorded worldwide, of which 4,302 happened in the Middle East countries. The POLO data also showed a total of 23,714 contract violations committed against our OFWs, majority of which were reported in the Middle East countries. The POEA noted that about 90% of these abuses involve our mga kasambahay or our household service workers. Ngayon po, nakakalungkot isipin, nakakalungkot ng ating isang kababayan na ating isang OFW na si Julie B. Ranara ay inihatid, was brutally killed in Kuwait. Siya po ay ni-rape, siya po ay nabuntis, siya'y sinagasaan at sinunog po ng alleged na anak ng kanyang employer. Masyado pong nakakaawa, karumal-dumal, walang kahabag-habag ang taong gumawa nito sa ating kababayan na gusto lamang pong maghanap buhay. Hindi po makatao, hindi po tao, animal po. Gusto ko po, hinihiling ko po kay Presidente Bongbong Marcos na hari na mabigyan po ng tunay na hustisya ang pagkamatay po ni Julie B. Ranara. I'm sorry. Previously, the Philippine government imposed a total ban on the migration of Filipino domestic health workers to Kuwait, which were subsequently lifted
after the Philippine government signed an agreement with the Kuwaiti government on protecting the rights and welfare of Filipino workers. Sadly, though, the rights prescribed in the agreement are minimal. Thus, the persistence of runaway OFWs in our shelters who seek our government's protection against their abusive employers. Powerless. Wala pong lakas. Our OFWs hope to leave the country for greener pastures. Powerless. Our OFWs suffer abuse from their employers, at times even leading to brutal death. Powerless. They run to our government shelters with no other recourse. Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, this is the lamentable situation of our distressed OFWs, especially for the undocumented. They have no other immediate recourse but to seek refuge sa ating pong mga bahay kalinga, to escape untenable situations and opt to wait for their repatriation to the Philippines under the protection of our shelters. For some undocumented OFWs, they prefer our shelters rather than staying in a foreign recruitment agencies, as previous experiences have shown that these agencies tend to collude with exploitative employers and also mistreat our OFWs while in their care. The next question is, are our shelters capable of providing safe, humane, and habitable conditions for our distressed OFWs to stay temporarily? Per DMW, in the Middle East, Bahay Kalinga shelters in our foreign service posts are currently being run by the migrant workers' offices. These shelters often burst at the seams of hundreds of distressed OFWs seeking a temporary sanctuary, forcing it to accommodate much more than its capacity. These shelters are very important in extending the government's care and expressing its seriousness to address the welfare of our OFWs. Therefore, we should ensure that each has adequate space to allow for a comfortable dwelling, clean facilities, and full-time personnel that will take care of our distressed OFWs' needs, including medical professionals who would regularly seek their health conditions, particularly those exhibiting signs of mental or emotional depression and those requiring reproductive health services. Indeed, a shelter is not a home. It is a mere place of refuge, a sanctuary. But we can make it a home for our OFWs who seek for a haven in times of distress while on a foreign soil, even just for the interim, if we provide the necessary amenities, the environment to make them feel at home and ease their pain. Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, we underscore that a shelter is a temporary refuge. The end goal is still for our distressed kababayans to safely go back home. Thus, the importance of untangling the knots in the current funding and system of repatriating our distressed OFWs. As provided for in Republic Act No. 11641, the law creating the DMW, a new fund, action fund, or agarang kalinga at saklolo para sa mga OFWs na nangangailangan is established under the administration of DMW to provide legal and other forms of assistance, including repatriation assistance to OFWs at foreign service posts where migrant workers' office has been established. The Action Fund is separate and distinct from the Assistance to Nationals and Legal Assistance Fund, which will be retained by the Department of Foreign Affairs for the benefit of our Filipinos overseas and for consular assistance services. For 2023, the Action Fund has an allocation of 1.37 billion. However, this is not solely for repatriation. OWA has an emergency repatriation fund for 2023 in the amount of 1.2 billion. However, this can only accommodate documented OFWs. The DFA, meanwhile, has 1 billion ATN and 259 million legal assistance fund, but this is not intended for overseas Filipinos, not migrant workers. In the tradition, the DFA and the DMW have agreed to come up with a joint agreement
that would allow the DFA to continue funding all assistance to migrant workers using the ATN Fund and LAF until such time that the DMW has completed setting up its operations for disbursing it. Action Fund through the overseas MWOs. The transition is expected to complete until this March this year. Having the funds separately administered by various agencies, coupled with the fact that the DMW is still in transition to fully establishing its operations, raised concerns on the effective utilization of repatriation funds and on the clear delineation of the target beneficiaries in accordance with governing laws. But one thing is certain and imperative: it should not affect or compromise the immediate repatriation of our distressed OFWs, which would greatly help decongest our shelters abroad. Mr. Speaker, I do not intend to delve deeper into these matters. I simply want to stress that these are the more profound issues brought to the fore by the problem of stranded OFWs in overcrowded government-run shelters in Kuwait. On the part of the OFW Partylist, we have coordinated with our OFW leaders in Kuwait and with other friendly organizations based in Kuwait, through which we provided personal hygiene kits to our OFWs in the shelter. Other Filipino organizations based in Kuwait also provided medicines and conducted medical missions. We suggested and connected the repatriation of our OFWs with DMW, DFA, and OWA. Finally, on a broader perspective, such depressing problems of stranded OFWs, congested shelters, or of maltreated and abused OFWs, illegal recruitment, and other complications of overseas employment could well be avoided if we will strengthen our economic policies that affect the country's employment rate, especially for white and blue-collar jobs, which is one of the contributing factors in the decision to work abroad. Sana po tayo'y magsama-sama tungo sa mga hakbang at pagbabagong magpaparamdam sa ating mga kapatid at minamahal na mga OFWs kung gaano nila natin sila pinapahalagahan bilang mga kababayan at mga bayani ng ating bayan. Sana po ay magtulungan tayong lahat upang tayo ay magpakita sa kanila na OFW, kayo po ang bida, ikaw po ang bida. Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, thank you so very much. And good afternoon po sa inyong lahat. Mr. Speaker, I am scheduled to visit the wake of our slain OFW Julie Biranara with our DMW and our OWA family right now. After this speech, I would be unable to yield the interpellation questions. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Speaker. Dear colleagues, maraming salamat po.